Good evening, everyone. This is Blendrix. I wanted to do a quick little tutorial for you guys tonight. I've discovered a really interesting technique for overcoming a problem that I have been thus far unable to find another solution to. I'll tell you a little story. I went and saw Opio, one of my favorite glitch hop producers. Saw him at a concert in Denver, and then the previous night I actually got a chance to talk with him for a little while at a little kind of a producer's workshop that he was putting on. And one of the things I really like about his music is the fact that it all has a swung beat, or some people call it a shuffled beat. That is sort of a shorthand way of saying that the beats are not exactly on the grid. So while the tempo is steady, the beats do tend to fall a little bit early or a little bit late of where they would normally fall on the grid, but they do so in a pattern. And you hear that a lot in swing music and jazz, funk, things like that. Swung beats tend to be a lot more catchy. They grab your attention a little bit more. They kind of make you nod your head involuntarily, you know. And that's one of the reasons I really gravitate towards making those beats, and why a lot of my tracks recently have had a significant amount of swing to them. So where that leads to a problem is we're using lots of different brands of software with different methods of dealing with things like swing and other sort of organic elements of the music. So if I'm using Ableton Live to sequence my tracks, and I'm using Native Instruments Massive for making my bass notes, like you'll hear here in a second, the only way there is really to set up any sort of modulation that occurs with the beat in Massive is to use your LFOs, performers, and step sequencers. Well, that doesn't swing. When I set a swing or a shuffle, or I guess they call it the groove pool in Ableton, if I set that out here, and even if I've got a really strong swing, there's no way for that information to translate into Massive, so that when I'm setting up some sort of modulation, whether it be changing the wavetable or the intensity, or the filter cutoff frequencies, things like that, none of that there's no way for me to translate this information into this plugin here so that it properly synchronizes its modulation with the beat. So back to Opio. When I was in his workshop, I asked him, I said, hey, so how do you deal with that with your tracks? Because what he does with his, I'd noticed, and I'd kind of been curious about it up until that point, all of his tracks have these these bass synths in them that have that sort of the wobble, but they wobbled with the swing. So I asked him, hey, just are you using a different kind of synth that knows how to do that? He says, no, I'm just taking each synth bank, and in this case he'd be taking like this bass channel, and he said he'd add a separate audio track and then route the audio in from like this, and then he'd go and he'd record it, and that, of course, to me sounds okay. Well, that's one way to do it, because once you've recorded it, you can go in and take that waveform and warp it to exactly the way you want it to go with the beat. My problem with that was this: what happens if he wants to change the way that the groove is? Like if you wanted to like boost the timing on this from 50 to 70% or something, it would totally change the way that the drums sound, and everything that's set up as a MIDI instrument. You can set the groove right here, and if you don't apply it or commit, then anytime you make changes up here, it changes across the board on any clip that's already set up. So that's a really easy way for you to leave your options open early in the game, and I think that's incredibly important. especially since a lot of times you don't really know exactly what your track is going to sound like until you are, 3/4 of the way through with it. So that left us with a problem. How could I find a way to pass that information, some sort of more organic modulation information to the synths? I wanted to be able to give them the command to wobble here, here, and here, but I want to set those points now and then be able to shift them as a result of shifting the entire track's groove later on. That's not possible when you do it with a wave file. You have to actually go and rebounce it and then rewarp it. That's assuming you haven't even wanted to make any changes to the way that the synth sounds. For instance, adding another oscillator or something like that. All those things add complexity and they make it more time consuming. So, doing a little bit of research, I was able to come up with a solution for this. If you see my previous videos, you know what these trigger things here are, but for the people who haven't seen that, basically the way that I set these up is I have these 3 channels. Their only job is to have a white noise generator in them, and that white noise I have even turned off so that nobody hears it except for Ableton. Ableton hears it as a control signal. Think of it as a carrier wave. When that white noise comes through, Ableton hears it, and you can do stuff with that information. I've used it for gating things before, which is what these square-shaped ADSR envelopes are for. You want it to go instant on and instant off. That's a good gate parameter. In this situation, I wanted an ADSR that's attack, decay, sustain, release that was a little more natural, because otherwise it doesn't sound like a wobble. It sounds like a gate. So I wanted this to kind of flow a little bit better. I gave it a nice long attack and a slightly shorter release, and even it gave a little bit of a bump right there so that it would kind of peak out and then get a little bit quieter. So that information would come through. If I were to play that note, you would hear this. There we go. Okay, so you can see there we're getting this, right? It's a nice kind of gradual sound. It's very organic. It doesn't sound like a gate. It sounds like a brush maybe. That's a really good way to build an LFO, especially if you want one that's gonna sound different depending on what part of the track you're in. You could be wobbling slow at one point and wobbling fast at another point. The way that you deal with that is with this ADSR envelope. And so if you want it to wobble fast at one point, you can automate your attack and decay and your and release so that they are quicker. And then you double up, and then it ends up sounding better. But with this, with the combination of being able to automate this stuff in the track and being able to automate the next parts here, you're actually able to control the LFO with a lot more fine-tune than you can when you're just putting an LFO in massive and letting its own internal LFO kind of take over for you. With this, we're actually sculpting our own LFO out of thin air. And the best part about this, though, is, and I stress this because I feel like people are going to say, well, why can't you just do that with a clip envelope? You could. Thing is, with a clip envelope, it doesn't know swing. You know, if you go in here and you add stuff in this envelope, it doesn't know where those beats are, you know, to be able to shift those things around. The groove is going to, you know, and it's just, my experience has shown this, and it's possible that, you know, maybe I'm doing something wrong with that, but this, I think, opens up a lot of possibilities to make things really interesting. So, what I'm doing here is sending that white noise information over to this this little channel here. You can see where it says audio from trigger 1, and then it says pre-effects. In my experience, it's always best to take your sound pre-effects when it's sound that you're not supposed to be hearing anyway. You don't want it to have any chance of having accidentally put through a delay or a reverb or something that messes up your envelopes. So for side chaining and for triggering gates and things like that, I tend to go with the pre-effects. Both of these channels you want to have set to monitor in. The audio out on this one, you don't have an audio out. I just do sends only, and then it's not actually doing any sends, so it doesn't have any audio to send out at all. What it is doing is it's listening to the incoming audio, and then this little plugin here, which is a free VST you can get for Windows, Mac, and Linux, so you Penguin heads out there can enjoy this too. Just go ahead and search for this on Google, MIDI Audio to CC. Totally free. It comes with a pack of a bunch of other really useful MIDI plugins too. I recommend checking those out. This takes the volume, or the gain, or I guess it's the volume of the incoming audio, and translates that to a MIDI signal between 0 and 127. That is what this envelope here is going to turn out to be, because that information I have coming from over there is mono, so it's only going to show up in one envelope. So, as you'll be able to see here, if I'm playing this, well, I suppose I need to collapse that so I don't keep getting dragged back there. Oh, it's being rascally on me. This is one little bug I haven't been able to figure out with this, why it behaves like that. It seems that it wants to steal the focus away from the track that you're trying to work on. But here, I'll tell you what. I'll do this. I'll have this channel armed here, and I'll just use my keyboard. There we go. I guess we're not going to be able to look at that, but you can see what it's doing here. This is the white noise. It's coming up, wobbles around a little bit, and then comes back down. Very same thing is happening over here. This is actually MIDI information that's being transmitted. Now, that plugin doesn't look like it's sending anything anywhere, and it's not. It's keeping it within live. In this next channel over here, this is an audio channel with a plugin on it. This is a MIDI channel, has no plugins on it, but what it does do is that it has a MIDI from A to M audio, which is what I have labeled this track. And then underneath that, it's pulling the MIDI from that instrument. All right. This is the important part. On Macs, you're going to use the IAC. It's a built-in MIDI Transport protocol. That uses the operating system like a set of patch cables to be able to route your audio or MIDI or other things. I guess IAC is just MIDI, but it routes MIDI signal that would normally have to pass out of Ableton, because Ableton doesn't have a way of handling its own MIDI signals for certain things within itself just yet. I hope that they improve on that in the future, but for now, we send that MIDI signal out to IAC, which is built into the Mac OS. On PC, you can get a thing called MIDI yoke. That's Y-O-K-E, like an oxen. And it does the very same thing. But on Macs, it's actually built in. In your audio MIDI setup, this is available under the utilities, under your applications. IAC is in there, and you can go in here, and mine's just labeled Ableton. But once that's set up, you can send MIDI information out from any program. It goes into it, and then any other program that supports it, you can take that very same MIDI information that's going into there and pull it back out. It's like a big melting pot of MIDI. Fortunately, the channels and everything like that keep it all sort of separate. So if you do a good job of making sure that you pick the right channels on all the different locations for things, you won't run into issues of triggering the wrong instruments with your MIDI signals. So this is now sending that volume information, that MIDI code of between 0 and 127 out into the operating system, and then it's coming back over here. Macro 1 in Massive I have set up to modulate the cutoff frequencies of these two bandpass filters and the wavetable positions on these two AI oscillators. It's a simple bass sound I've been working on. There's really not a lot of time that's gone into developing it. I'm mainly just putting this tutorial up to kind of show you the proof of concept here. So when you're in this mode, you can take any of these macro knobs that you've assigned to things, and you can get them out on the main screen over here, so you can actually modulate them from the program without having to have Massive open and recording it manually. So right click on there, you map it out to one of these macro knobs. Now the macro knob controls that parameter. Taking it a step further, we can get it so that the we can automate this based on MIDI signal that's incoming. Well, guess where we have some incoming MIDI signal from? Right over here. Now that it's playing that, see what it's doing? Now what I did there was I just right-clicked on it and I did edit MIDI map. And if there's already incoming MIDI signal, when you do that, it'll take the first MIDI signal that it hears and it'll assign that knob, right? So that's what happened there. In MIDI map mode, you can go up here to this MIDI mappings and you can set the range that you want any of those parameters to achieve, which is why that knob is not turning the full length either direction. I set it up so that it doesn't go all the way down, it doesn't go all the way up. It's you know, in the middle there. So now if I turn on this bass, see what that's doing? If this were a swung beat, I could have this set up so that it was hitting on certain drum beats, and if I change the swing, it would change right along with it. What's even cooler is that it doesn't have to be a pattern like this. Like right now, it sounds kind of dumb because it's just the standard thing that's set up there. I've got one on in between each beat. But what would happen if you wanted to do something a little more creative? Right now, I've got my keyboard set up so that it'll trigger it too. So as you can see there, that gives me a lot of opportunity to make a really interesting sort of LFO that has its own pattern. And because of that, I could record an LFO that I felt was a good match. And then I would know that each peak and valley were the exact same measurement. The problem I have with using the mod wheel on a keyboard like this to do that kind of modulation stuff is that I feel like I don't get enough precision for it to sound good. I end up having to go back and manually adjust it to make it sound polished. With this, all that polish is found within that ADSR envelope that over here. So I can make it take longer to wind up, or I can make it take shorter time to wind up. Either way, I can even set it up so that each of these clips changes the fundamental properties of this ADSR envelope. So if I want to make it so that it plays faster, I can just hit the next clip, and not only does it play the next set of notes, but it also changes the way that those notes sound. So I think this could be a really, really helpful feature for people who want to modulate their synthesizers and various other instruments based on something a little more arbitrary than just the beat itself. Because sure, everybody can set up a modulation that synchronizes with the beat, but once you bring that swing in, it really kind of throws a monkey wrench in the works unless you've got something like this set up. So I highly encourage you to try out this plugin. if you find a better way to do this, please tell me. I mean, I'm really excited about this, but it is also kind of a pain to have it set up this way too. So I'd be really open to experimenting with different ways of doing it. If you have any problems getting it set up, feel free to send me a message or comment on the video. I'd be glad to do whatever I can to walk you through the steps that I took. Check me out on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Blendrix. You can also follow me on Twitter. So it's twitter.com/Blendrix. That's a really good way to get a hold of me personally also, if you just want to kind of shoot the breeze and talk shop. All right. Well, until next time, I hope you guys are having a good time, and stay classy.